Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The rain fell in steady sheets against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vaughn estate, turning the manicured gardens into a blur of muted greens and grays. Eliza Vaughn stood at her bedroom window, one hand pressed against the cool glass, watching droplets trace elaborate patterns downward. At 18, her reflection showed a striking young woman with warm brown skin, high cheekbones, and eyes that held both wisdom and pain beyond her years. Those eyes had seen too much, learned too early how cruel the world could be to a girl who'd lost her mother too soon. The setting sun cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the delicate features she'd inherited from her late mother, features that her stepmother, Amber Rothschild, never failed to remind her were common, despite their appeal. The sound of Amber's expensive Louboutin heels clicking on the marble floors downstairs made Eliza's shoulders tense. Each sharp click was like a countdown to something inevitable, something she couldn't quite name but felt in her bones. She'd learned to read the different rhythms of Amber's walks over the years. The slow, measured pace when she was plotting, the quick, aggressive staccato when she was angry, and this current pattern, the sound of victory approaching. Life hadn't been kind to Eliza since losing her mother at age 8. The memory of that day remained sharp enough to draw blood, the smell of antiseptic. In the hospital corridor, the doctor's gentle voice explaining that her mother hadn't survived the surgery, the way her father's hand had gone slack in hers when he heard the news. Lucy Vaughn had been a beacon of warmth and love in their lives, a pediatric nurse whose smile could calm the most frightened child, whose touch could ease the most stubborn fever. The official story was that Lucy had died of complications from pneumonia, but Eliza knew better. Her mother had stayed late at the hospital during a severe winter storm, refusing to leave her young patients when replacement staff couldn't make it in. She'd worked 36 hours straight, making sure every child was stable before finally heading home. The car accident that took her life was blamed on the icy roads, but Eliza knew the truth. Exhaustion had taken her mother's reflexes. Her dedication to others had stolen her away. Adam Vaughn, her father and CEO of Vaughn Tech Solutions, had fallen apart in the aftermath. A man who'd once been full of laughter and silly jokes became a ghost in his own home, buried in work and grief. Eliza still remembered the night she'd found him in his study, surrounded by empty whiskey glasses, clutching one of Lucy's sweaters and sobbing. Amber Rothschild had swept into their lives like a perfectly timed storm. She'd been hired as Vaughn Tech's new marketing director, and within months, she'd positioned herself as Adam's support system, his confidant, his savior. Eliza, at 9 years old, had watched in helpless silence as Amber orchestrated what she would later recognize as a masterclass in manipulation. "Your father needs someone to take care of him," Amber had said, kneeling down to Eliza's level the day before the wedding. "And you, dear girl, need a mother's guidance." That guidance had turned out to be a decade of subtle cruelty and calculated manipulation. Amber was an artist when it came to maintaining appearances. To the outside world, she was the perfect stepmother, gracious, elegant, and seemingly devoted to her new family. She hosted charity events, joined the right boards, and never failed to mention her beloved stepdaughter in interviews. Behind closed doors, Amber wielded words like weapons. She'd systematically dismantled Eliza's self-worth with the precision of a surgeon. "Oh, darling," she would say, examining Eliza's report card full of A's, academic achievement can only take someone like you so far best to focus on more attainable goals. Or, that dress would be lovely on someone with a different complexion. Perhaps we should stick to more forgiving styles. The worst part was how she'd isolated Adam from his daughter. Every attempt Eliza made to connect with her father was subtly undermined. Family dinners became exercises in tension, with Amber directing the conversation away from any meaningful interaction between father and daughter. "Adam, darling," she would interject whenever Eliza tried to discuss her dreams of college. "You remember that board meeting tomorrow? You should really review those documents tonight." Now, watching the rain transform the world outside her window, Eliza felt that familiar ache in her chest, the longing for her mother's warm embrace, for her father's old smile, for a life unburdened by Amber's elegant tyranny. She pressed her forehead against the glass, closing her eyes against tears that threatened to fall. The sound of car tires on wet gravel snapped her attention back to the present. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Ghost was making its way up the circular driveway, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Eliza's heart rate accelerated as she recognized the Montgomery Industries logo on the license plate. "Eliza," Amber's voice carried up the grand staircase, honeyed with false warmth. "Come down to the formal sitting room, darling, and do wear that navy dress I bought you, the one that makes you look presentable." Her fingers trembled slightly as she changed into the dress, a conservative piece that Amber had deemed appropriate for someone of her background. The fabric felt like a straitjacket against her skin, but she'd learned long ago to pick her battles. As she fastened the pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, one of the few pieces Amber hadn't managed to misplace over the years, Eliza caught her reflection in the full-length mirror. The young woman staring back at her was a study and contained Lucy. Her mother's features had matured into a beauty that even Amber couldn't deny, though she tried her best to minimize it with unflattering clothes and subtle criticisms. Eliza's hair, worn in elegant shoulder-length twists, framed a face that held echoes of Lucy's gentle strength. The clicking of heels grew more insistent. "Eliza, our guests are waiting." Taking a deep breath, Eliza descended the curved staircase, each step measured and careful. The formal sitting room doors stood open, revealing a tableau that would change her life forever. Her father sat in his favorite leather armchair, but he might as well have been carved from stone. Amber perched on the arm of his chair, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder, her red lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And there, commanding attention from the center of the room, stood Harrison Montgomery Sr., the 72-year-old patriarch of Montgomery Industries. His steel gray hair and impeccable suit spoke of old money and older power. He turned as Eliza entered, his sharp eyes assessing her with the same calculation he likely used to evaluate business acquisitions. "Ah," he said, his aged voice carrying easily across the antique furniture and Persian rugs. "So this is the girl." Amber's smile widened. "Isn't she lovely? We've worked so hard to polish her into something suitable." Eliza felt her cheeks burn at the casual degradation, but she kept her spine straight, her expression neutral. Years of Amber's guidance had taught her to wear dignity like armor. "Indeed," Harrison said, taking a measured sip from his crystal tumbler. $60,000, he continued, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. "A fair price for a marriage to my son. Wouldn't you agree, Adam?" The world tilted sideways. Eliza's fingers gripped the doorframe, though she managed to keep her face composed. "Marriage? Price?" The words bounced around her mind like shrapnel, but their meaning refused to take solid form. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. Amber's perfectly manicured hand tightened on his shoulder as he nodded. "A generous offer, Mr. Montgomery." "No," Eliza whispered, but no one seemed to hear, or if they did, they didn't care. The rain continued its steady pound against the windows, nature's accompaniment to the sound of her world crumbling. Harrison set his glass down with a decisive click. "The arrangements will be handled discreetly, of course. The marriage license has already been prepared. We'll have the ceremony at the courthouse tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" The word escaped before Eliza could stop it. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her, Harrison's calculating, Amber's warning, and her father's empty. "Is there a problem?" Harrison's tone suggested that problems were things that happened to other people, never to him. Amber stood, moving with the fluid Lucy of a predator. "Of course not, Mr. Montgomery. Eliza understands what an honor this is, don't you, dear? The Montgomery name, the stability it will provide." Her fingers wrapped around Eliza's arm, nails digging in slightly. "After all, what other prospects could someone like you hope for?" The last fragments of Eliza's childhood shattered in that moment. She looked at her father, silently begging him to be the man he'd been when her mother was alive, the father who'd sworn to protect her always. But Adam Vaughn stared into his whiskey glass, as if it held answers to questions he'd never dared to ask. "Excellent," Harrison said, rising. "The car will collect her at 9 tomorrow morning. Adam, the transfer will be completed once the ceremony is done." He paused at the door, giving Eliza one final appraising look. "Welcome to the Montgomery family, my dear. Do try not to disappoint us." The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house, like a judge's gavel. Amber's grip on Eliza's arm relaxed, but her smile grew sharper. "Well, darling, it seems dreams do come true even for girls like you." Eliza pulled away, her voice barely a whisper. "Daddy, please." But Adam was already standing, moving toward his study, with the mechanical motions of a man sleepwalking through his own life. The study door closed behind him with a soft click that held all the finality of a tomb being sealed. Amber's laugh was light, musical, and utterly cruel. "Oh, my dear girl, did you really think he would choose you over peace? Over me? You've been a burden since your mother died, a constant reminder of his greatest loss. At least now you'll be a profitable one." Eliza made it back to her room before the tears came. She sank to the floor, her back against the door, the navy dress pooling around her like spilled ink. Outside, the rain continued its relentless descent, washing away the last colors of sunset and leaving only darkness behind. In 8 hours, she would be a Montgomery. In 8 hours, her life would be sold for $60,000. In 8 hours, she would learn whether this was truly the end of her story, or, though she dared not hope it, the beginning of something entirely unexpected. The price of innocence, it seemed, could be measured in dollars and cents, but the cost of survival that would be calculated in tears, in silence, and in the fierce determination that burned beneath her grief. Tomorrow would come, bringing with it a new name and a new cage. But tonight, Eliza Vaughn allowed herself one last moment of freedom, one last cry for the girl she'd been, and one last prayer for the woman she would need to become. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Groom. The courthouse's fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over Eliza's skin as she sat alone on a wooden bench outside courtroom B. The morning had passed in a blur of mechanical motions, being ushered into Amber's silver Mercedes at precisely 9, watching raindrops chase each other across the window during the silent drive downtown, following a court clerk's efficient footsteps through echoing marble halls. Now she sat, hands folded in her lap, wearing the simple white dress Amber had thrust at her that morning. Nothing too presumptuous, her stepmother had sneered, smoothing the cotton fabric with critical fingers. "We wouldn't want anyone thinking you're trying too hard to appear above your station." The dress felt more like a prison uniform than wedding attire, its stark whiteness a mockery of traditional bridal dreams. Eliza's mother had kept her own wedding dress preserved in the attic, an elegant creation of lace and pearls that had once promised love and possibility. That dress, like so many precious things, had disappeared shortly after Amber moved in. The sound of approaching footsteps made Eliza's shoulders tense, but instead of Amber's sharp heels or Harrison Sr.'s measured stride, these steps were quick and light. A young court clerk appeared, her face sympathetic as she took in Eliza's solitary figure. "The judge will be ready in about 20 minutes, she said softly. "Would you like some water?" Eliza managed a small shake of her head. Her throat felt too tight for water, too tight for air. The reality of what was about to happen pressed against her chest like a weight. She hadn't even seen a photo of Harrison Montgomery Jr., her intended husband. Amber had been deliberately vague about him, offering only cutting remarks about how Eliza should be grateful a girl like her marrying into the Montgomery family was more than she deserved. The questions that had kept her awake all night tumbled through her mind again. How old was he? What kind of man would agree to this arrangement? Would he be cruel like his father, seeing her as nothing more than a purchased commodity? Or worse, would he be weak, like her own father, unable to stand against the tide of manipulation and control? The click of heels against marble announced Amber's arrival. She swept around the corner like a perfectly coiffed storm, Adam trailing in her wake like a shadow. Harrison Montgomery Sr. followed, his presence commanding attention even in the mundane setting of a courthouse hallway. "Well," Amber said, her voice carrying just enough to draw curious glances from passing courthouse staff. "Isn't this exciting, darling? A Montgomery wedding, who would have thought?" The emphasis she placed on Montgomery made it clear she found the whole situation both amusing and slightly distasteful. Eliza kept her eyes fixed on her hands, noting distantly that her mother's delicate gold ring, the only piece of jewelry she'd been allowed to wear, today caught the fluorescent light like a trapped star. "The papers are ready," Harrison Sr. announced, his tone suggesting he was concluding a business merger rather than arranging his son's marriage. "We're just waiting on Edward to arrive." Edward, so that was his name. Eliza turned it over in her mind, trying to form a picture of the man who would soon be her husband. The name felt solid, traditional, a name that belonged in oak-paneled boardrooms and private club lounges. More footsteps echoed through the corridor, these ones different, strong, purposeful, but unhurried. Eliza kept her eyes down, counting the squares in the courthouse's linoleum floor. 1, 2, 3. "Edward," Harrison Sr.'s voice carried a note of warning. "You're nearly late. Traffic was unavoidable. Father, though I suspect you knew that when you arranged this morning's timing." The voice that answered Harrison Sr. was nothing like Eliza had imagined, deep but gentle, with an undertone of steel that suggested its owner was used to standing his ground. Despite herself, she looked up. Edward Harrison Montgomery stood 6 with broad shoulders and the kind of face that belonged in fashion magazines rather than merger announcements. At 33, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd earned his success rather than inherited it. His steel gray eyes, so like his father's in color, but utterly different in warmth, widened slightly as they took her in. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that somehow managed to look both expensive and understated. His dark hair was styled professionally, but not severely, and a slight shadow of stubble along his jaw suggested he'd been too preoccupied or too rebellious to achieve his father's standard of clean-shaven perfection. "I'm Edward," he said softly, moving to stand before her. His voice was pitched low, meant only for her ears. "And you must be Eliza." The gentle way he said her name, not rushing through it like the courthouse staff, not dripping it with disdain like Amber, made something in Eliza's chest tighten. She managed a small nod, acutely aware of Amber's sharp eyes watching their interaction. "The judge is ready for you now," the clerk announced, appearing in the courtroom doorway. "If you'll all follow me." What followed was a ceremony that felt more like a business transaction than a wedding. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, barely glanced up from the papers as she read the standard vows. Amber stood at Adam's side, her hand resting possessively on his arm as if to prevent him from any last-minute attacks of paternal conscience. Harrison Sr. watched the proceedings with the satisfied air of a man seeing a long-term investment finally pay off. But Edward was different. When it came time to say "I do," he turned to face Eliza fully, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made the fluorescent lights dim and the mechanical words take on unexpected weight. His hand, when he took hers to slip on the simple gold band Harrison Sr. had provided, was warm and steady. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York," the judge intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." There was no, "You may kiss the bride," no rice, no flowers, no celebration, just Harrison Sr. immediately turning to Adam, with papers requiring signatures, and Amber's satisfied smirk as she watched another piece of her stepdaughter's life fall under someone else's control. "Miss S. Montgomery," Edward said quietly, still holding her hand. The title should have felt like another shackle, but something in his voice made it sound almost like a question or perhaps a promise. "The car is waiting," Harrison Sr. announced, having concluded his business with Adam. "Edward, you'll take Eliza to the estate. I have meetings this afternoon, but I trust you can handle the transition." Amber stepped forward, her smile razor sharp. "Of course, you'll want to get your new bride settled in, Eliza, darling. Do try to remember everything I taught you about being a proper wife, though I suppose the Montgomerys have their own standards." The slight emphasis she placed on standards made her meaning clear. Whatever those standards were, Amber doubted Eliza could meet them. But before Eliza could feel the familiar sting of her stepmother's words, Edward's hand tightened slightly around hers. "I'm sure Eliza will define her own role in our family," he said, his tone pleasant but firm. "Shall we?" This last was directed at Eliza, accompanied by a slight tug toward the courthouse exit. The walk through the courthouse felt surreal, like moving through water. Edward's hand remained steady around hers, guiding her past curious onlookers and through the heavy doors into the late morning sun. A sleek black Bentley waited at the curb, a uniformed driver holding the door open. "After you," Edward said softly, helping her into the car's leather interior. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing them into a bubble of climate-controlled silence. Moments later, Edward slid in beside her, and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. Only then did Eliza realize she hadn't said goodbye to her father. She turned to look through the rear window, but the courthouse was already disappearing around a corner, taking with it the last fragments of her old life. "Here," Edward's voice drew her attention back. He was holding out a pristine white handkerchief, monogrammed with his initials. "For the tears you're trying not to shed." The simple kindness in the gesture broke something inside her. Eliza took the handkerchief, pressing it to her eyes as the first tears fell. She waited for him to sigh in annoyance, or make some cutting remark about emotional displays, but Edward remained quietly present beside her, neither touching her nor pulling away. When she finally regained her composure, the car was crossing the Queensboro Bridge, the Manhattan skyline rising before them, like a crystal forest. Edward's voice, when he spoke again, held none of the awkwardness she'd expected. "I want you to know something," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I had no idea about the arrangement my father made. I found out this morning." Eliza turned to look at him, studying his profile against the city backdrop. "Then why did you go through with it?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because I knew if I refused, he would have found someone else, someone who might not care about treating you with respect. My father's deals always go through, one way or another. At least this way." He trailed off, but Eliza understood. At least this way. She had ended up with someone who seemed to have a conscience, someone who looked at her and saw a person rather than a possession. The car turned onto Fifth Avenue, joining the steady flow of traffic heading uptown. Edward shifted slightly in his seat, loosening his tie. "I know this isn't what either of us would have chosen, but I want to make something clear. In this marriage, you'll be my equal, not my property. Whatever game my father and your stepmother think they're playing, we don't have to play by their rules." The words were like oxygen after a long time underwater. Eliza found herself studying him more carefully. The strength in his jaw, yes, but also the kindness around his eyes. The way he held himself, like someone used to carrying responsibility rather than wielding power. "The estate is about 20 minutes away," Edward continued. "It's been in the family for generations, but I've had my own wing renovated recently. You'll have your own suite of rooms there, completely private. No one, not even my father, will enter without your permission." The promise of privacy, of space that would truly be hers, made Eliza's throat tight again. Even in her father's house, Amber had felt free to enter her room at will to rearrange, criticize, and remind Eliza that nothing really belonged to her. As if reading her thoughts, Edward added, "The staff answers to me, not my father. They're good people who value discretion. Whatever you need, changes to the rooms, different furniture, new clothes, just ask. Consider it part of making this situation as bearable as possible." The car turned through elaborate iron gates, following a curved driveway through manicured grounds. The Montgomery estate rose before them, a masterpiece of Gothic Revival architecture set against the morning sky. To Eliza's surprise, it didn't feel oppressive, despite its grandeur. Something about the way sunlight played across its stone facades and multiple balconies made it seem almost welcoming. "Home sweet home," Edward murmured as the car came to a stop. But before the driver could open their door, he turned to face Eliza fully. "One more thing. I know we're legally married now, but we'll take things at your pace. You're 18, barely starting your life. I won't let this arrangement steal your choices from you." The driver opened the door then, letting in a rush of autumn air that carried the scent of roses from the nearby garden. Edward stepped out first, then offered his hand to help Eliza emerge. As she stood beside him, looking up at what would now be her home, she felt something unexpected unfurl in her chest, not quite hope, perhaps, but the possibility of it. "Would you like to see your rooms?" Edward asked, offering his arm with old-world courtesy that somehow didn't feel patronizing. "Cook usually serves lunch on the terrace this time of year. If you're hungry, or we could have something sent up, if you'd prefer to settle in privately." Eliza found her voice at last, surprising herself with its steadiness. "The terrace sounds nice, actually, if that's all right." Edward's smile was warm and genuine. "More than all right. Shall we?" As they climbed the broad stone steps together, Eliza caught their reflection in one of the estate's many windows. She in her simple white dress, he in his elegant suit, looking for all the world like a normal couple coming home together. Maybe, she thought, this arranged marriage didn't have to be an ending. Maybe, just maybe, it could be the beginning of something unexpected and real. The massive front doors opened silently before them, revealing a soaring entry hall with a sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier. But it was the small details that caught Eliza's attention. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, comfortable-looking window seats flooded with natural light, books that showed signs of actually being read rather than just displayed. "Welcome home, Miss S. Montgomery," Edward said softly. And for the first time since hearing that title in the courthouse, Eliza felt herself begin to smile. Chapter 3. First light of love. The Montgomery estate's west wing stretched before Eliza like a world unto itself. Edward led her through a series of elegantly appointed rooms, each one more beautiful than the last. until they reached a set of double doors carved with intricate Art Nouveau roses. "Your suite," he said, producing a small golden key. "The only other copy is in the estate's safe, and only you can authorize its use." He handed her the key, careful not to let his fingers brush hers. "Would you like to see inside?" Eliza turned the key in the lock. Feeling the solid weight of real brass and craftsmanship, the doors swung open silently, revealing a space that took her breath away. Afternoon sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a sitting room that managed to be both grand and welcoming. The walls were painted a soft cream, providing a perfect backdrop for artwork that made her heart skip contemporary pieces by Black artists. She recognized from her art history classes their vibrant colors and powerful themes, making the space feel immediately personal. "I had the decorator research artist you might appreciate," Edward said quietly, noting her reaction. "The collection can be changed, of course, if you prefer different pieces." But Eliza was already moving deeper into the suite, taking in the details. A writing desk of pale maple sat in one corner, its surface clean but equipped with everything she might need. Comfortable seating areas were arranged to take advantage of both the view and the marble fireplace. Built-in bookshelves lined one wall, their lower shelves already filled with a carefully curated selection that made her pause: contemporary fiction by diverse authors, art books, and several volumes on business and finance that didn't seem randomly chosen. "I noticed your academic records mentioned an interest in business administration," Edward explained, following her gaze to the books. "I thought you might want to explore that further." The bedroom beyond the sitting room was a study in understated luxury. A king-sized bed dressed in soft linens in shades of blue and silver dominated one wall, while a separate seating area created a peaceful retreat. The en-suite bathroom gleamed with marble and chrome, featuring both a deep soaking tub and a rain shower. But it was the walk-in closet that made Eliza's steps falter. Unlike the rest of the suite, it was completely empty except for a single note card placed on a central island. "I didn't want to presume," Edward said, noticing her surprise. "There's a personal shopper on call whenever you're ready to build your wardrobe. Everything will be your choice. Styles, colors, designers, no one else's preferences or restrictions." The deliberate way he said restrictions made it clear he understood exactly how Amber had used clothing as another form of control. Eliza's fingers traced the edge of the note card, which contained the shopper's contact information written in elegant script. "Thank you," she said softly, and meant it for more than just the closet. "Are you hungry?" Edward asked, giving her space to compose herself. "We could have lunch brought up here if you'd prefer privacy, or the terrace would be nice." "The terrace would be nice," Eliza found herself saying. Something about Edward's quiet consideration made her want to be brave, to step beyond the safety of these beautiful rooms. He smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face, softening the professional polish into something warmer. "The terrace it is, then, though." He gestured at the late September sunshine. "Perhaps a wrap? The breeze can be cool this time of year." Before Eliza could worry about not having appropriate clothing, Edward moved to a discreet door she hadn't noticed. It opened to reveal a small selection of designer outerwear. "Just basics for now," he said, "until you can choose your own." The cashmere wrap she selected was the color of autumn leaves, soft as a whisper against her skin. Edward led her through the wing's private corridors to a terrace that overlooked the estate's rose gardens. A table had been set for two, white linens bright against the stone balustrade, silver gleaming in the afternoon light. "Mr. Edward," an elderly woman in a housekeeper's uniform, appeared as they approached. Cooks prepared a light lunch menu. "The salmon you like, fresh salads, and those little lemon tarts." She turned to Eliza with a warm smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Montgomery. I'm Mrs. Chen. If there's anything you need day or night, just ring." Edward held Eliza's chair, waiting until she was settled before taking his own seat. A server appeared silently with water and a selection of fresh juices, then disappeared just as quietly. "I meant what I said about the staff," Edward said once they were alone. "They're loyal to me, not my father. You won't be watched or reported on here." The implication that Harrison Sr. might have expected such surveillance made Eliza's hands clench in her lap. But before she could dwell on it, their first course arrived. A delicate soup that smelled of fresh herbs and comfort. "Tell me about yourself." Edward's question was gentle, accompanied by a genuine smile. "I'd like to know who I'm sharing my life with, beyond what's in the files my father's people compiled." Something in his tone made Eliza look up sharply. You've seen those files? I insisted once I learned of the arrangement this morning. I wanted to understand. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to understand what kind of person would agree to sell their daughter to the Montgomerys. The soup suddenly tasted like ashes in Eliza's mouth. My father is a broken man who let himself be manipulated by a master. Edward finished, he said. The files were quite thorough about Amber Rothschild's methods. The way he said her stepmother's name contained volumes of controlled anger. Eliza found herself studying him more carefully, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped his silverware just a fraction too tightly. You really didn't know? She asked. About the arrangement. Edward set down his spoon, meeting her gaze directly. No. I was in London all last week, closing a deal that will move our clean energy division into European markets. I flew back last night, and this morning my father called me to his study. He presented the whole thing as a fate. Accomplish the papers ready. The courthouse booked. You already on your way downtown. But you agreed, Eliza said softly. Why? Because I know my father. Edward's voice held a lifetime of understanding. If I'd refused, he would have found someone else in our circle to marry you, someone who would have seen you as property, who would have treated you like... He trailed off, his expression darkening. Like merchandise, Eliza finished. Purchased and owned. Yes. Edward's hand moved as if to cover hers, then stopped just short. I couldn't let that happen, not when I could prevent it. The main course arrived, perfectly grilled salmon on a bed of seasonal vegetables, the presentation worthy of a fine restaurant. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, each processing the morning's events. You asked about me, Eliza said finally. What would you like to know? Edward's smile returned, warming his gray eyes. Everything, your dreams, your fears, your favorite books, what makes you laugh, what makes you angry, who you are when no one's watching. The simple honesty in his voice made something in Eliza's chest ache. How long had it been since anyone had genuinely wanted to know her? Since Amber's arrival, she'd been trained to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible in her own life. I love art, she found herself saying, not just looking at it, but understanding it, the history, the context, the way it reflects and shapes culture. And I'm good at math, even though Amber said it wasn't ladylike to show it. I used to help the other students in calculus class, explaining concepts the teacher couldn't quite get across. A teacher at heart, Edward noted. And the business administration interest? I want to understand how things work, Eliza admitted. Not just numbers, but systems. Organizations, how to make them better, more efficient, more human. Edward's expression showed genuine interest. We could use more of that perspective at Montgomery Industries. Too often, efficiency comes at the cost of humanity. Their conversation flowed easily through the rest of lunch, touching on books they'd both loved, places they hoped to visit, causes they believed in. Edward, it turned out, had a dry sense of humor that made Eliza laugh despite herself. He told stories about his travels that focused on the people he'd met, rather than the deals. He'd closed and asked thoughtful questions that showed he was really listening to her answers. As their empty dessert plates were cleared away, Edward checked his watch. I have a video conference in 20 minutes, part of the European deal that can't wait. Would you like to explore the grounds this afternoon? Miss S. Chen can show you the gardens, or you're welcome to discover them on your own. This is your home now, you don't need permission to move through it. The freedom implicit in that statement made Eliza's throat tight. I think I'd like to get settled in my rooms first. If that's all right, maybe look through those books you provided. Of course. Edward stood, offering his hand to help her up. I'll have dinner sent to your suite around 7, unless you'd prefer to dine together. Eliza thought about it, surprised to find she wasn't automatically choosing the safer option of solitude. Together would be nice, but in my sitting room. I'm not quite ready for the formal dining room. Perfect. Edward's smile was understanding. I'll bring chocolate cake. I find it helps when processing major life changes. The walk back to her suite was comfortable, filled with Edward pointing out artwork she might enjoy and explaining which parts of the estate were private versus public spaces. At her doors, he stopped, maintaining a respectful distance. Eliza, he said softly, I know this isn't how either of us imagined starting a marriage, but I want you to know you're safe here with me. Whatever this becomes, it will be on your terms. She nodded, unable to find words for the complex emotions swirling in her chest. Edward gave her another warm smile and turned to go. Edward, her voice stopped him, Thank you for being unexpected." His laugh was gentle. "I think we're both going to be full of surprises." Alone in her suite, Eliza moved through the room slowly, really taking in the details. Someone, probably Miss S. Chen, had unpacked the small bag she'd brought from home, arranging her few possessions with care. Her mother's photo, the one she'd kept hidden from Amber, sat in a new silver frame on the bedside table. The afternoon sun painted patterns on the pale carpet as Eliza curled up in a window seat with one of the business books. But her mind kept drifting to lunch, to the way Edward listened, as if her thoughts mattered, to the genuine interest in his eyes when she spoke about her dreams. She thought about Amber's sneering predictions of what marriage to a Montgomery would mean, about Harrison Sr.'s cold assessment of her worth in dollars and cents. But Edward was different. He saw her not as a possession or a problem, but as a person, a partner. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Eliza found herself looking forward to dinner, to more conversation, to chocolate cake, to discovering who they might become together. This morning, she'd been a bride sold to the highest bidder. Tonight, she was something else, something undefined but full of possibility. The first light of something that felt dangerously like hope began to warm her heart.